Welcome, curious soul, to Tales of the Tattered Book. I am your host, the keeper of the book. With each passing moment, new horrors appear on these weathered pages, yearning to be told. As I open this arcane tome, remember, knowledge comes at a price, and some truths are better left unspoken. Tonight, dear listeners, the Tattered Book opens once more, its yellowed pages revealing a tale of grief, madness, and the thin veil between our world and realms beyond. Listen closely, dear audience, to the Crow's Descent.
In the sullen shadows of a late Prague afternoon, Josef Novak slumped in his armchair, the absence of his sister's laughter leaving a palpable void in the room. First, it was his father 2 years ago, then his mother last month, and now, just hours prior, Helena, the last of his family, had been laid to rest. Helena, the anchor in his storm-tossed family, was gone. Josef's mind wandered through the fog of the funeral, feeling like a ghost among the mourners. Every tear-streaked face, every choked sob, felt like a silent accusation. They were there for Helena, his vibrant, life-affirming sister, the one who truly held their family together. He, on the other hand, was a mere afterthought, a shadow clinging to the edges of her light. The air, heavy with the scent of lilies clinging to his funeral clothes, felt suffocating even in the spacious living room. The worn velvet drapes remained drawn, shrouding the room in a perpetual twilight. Outside, the mournful echoes of the funeral procession slowly faded into the distance. Now, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, the weight of responsibility for the family business and the creaking old house on Husova Street loomed over him, casting a long shadow that stretched all the way to the cemetery that bordered their backyard. Each morning he would to see the family mausoleum, standing out against the smattering of marble and granite tombstones in all its white glory. It felt like a cruel joke having his family's final resting place constantly within view from his bedroom. For Josef, it served as a constant reminder of his loss, but more importantly, his failure to protect his sister from whatever illness had claimed her. A week had passed, the melancholy aggravating rather than fading, when something new marred the bleak view. A lone crow perched atop the mausoleum, as if it were a dark figurine placed there for his viewing pleasure. It didn't caw, but let out a harsh rasp that scraped against the silence like a rusty nail on bone. Josef blinked, the world momentarily blurring at the edges. Had the crow's head tilted ever so slightly? He tried to brush it off as a coincidence, assuming that the bird was simply drawn to the scent of a recent burial. But the disquiet remained all day. The next day, another crow joined the first one. They perched side by side, dark forms stark against the white marble. Sharp curiosity flickered within Josef, a tiny spark in the vast emptiness of his grief. Still, he did nothing, his will to act dulled by sorrow. The third day arrived, and a third crow materialized. Now a disquieting pattern emerged. They cawed and screeched all day, a grating chorus that seemed to pierce the very walls of the house, even with the windows firmly shut. An irrational fear took hold. Were they mocking him? Did they know something he didn't? "They're just birds. Just birds," he muttered, his voice hoarse from disuse. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Driven by a desperate need to chase away the unsettling omens, Josef bundled himself up in a threadbare coat and ventured outside. The late autumn air bit at his exposed skin as he trudged through the muddy graveyard towards the mausoleum. He chased the crows away with wild, flailing arms. Their response was a collective cacophony of disgruntled caws and screams as they flapped reluctantly into the ashen sky. Now alone, Josef glanced at the marble mausoleum that had been stained with time and neglect. How had he let it become so unkempt? Shame washed over him. His family deserved better. Helena deserved better. A sudden thought struck him. Could this neglect be the reason for the crows' arrival? Perhaps they were trying to convey a message, or maybe it was a rebuke from beyond the grave. Fueled by this newfound purpose, Josef scoured through the house, returning to the cemetery with a bucket and cleaning supplies. With surprising vigor, he set about scrubbing the mausoleum until the white surface shone under the dim light of the winter sun. With each stroke of the brush, a silent apology formed on his lips, a plea for forgiveness for his carelessness. Next, he turned his attention to the wilted flowers. He carefully removed them, a pang of grief hitting him as he recognized the faded lilies from Helena's funeral. "I'm sorry, Helena. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." Josef woke up the day after still feeling the ache of his labor and the pride that came with it. The pride was short-lived as the crows had returned, much to his dismay. He watched as more of them descended from the gray sky and settled on the structure, as if it was their new home. Overwhelmed by a sense of futility, despair, and hopelessness, Josef felt a stone settling in his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. His shoulders hunched, muscles tightening into a knot as his gaze remained fixed all day on the multiplying crows. He had tried to rectify his past neglect. He had done everything he could, but it was all for naught. With each passing day, their number swelled until the once gleaming marble became a sea of jet-black feathers. His attempts to get rid of them became more frantic and bizarre each time. He tried placing small offerings on the grave, trinkets that Helena had once cherished, in the hope that the spirits of his family would protect their tomb. He then tried using sticks of pungent incense and left them burning on the mausoleum, hoping the fragrant smoke would banish the birds. Still, the swarm gathered. They became his obsession. He tried everything he could think of, loud noises, shiny objects. Nothing worked. The crows remained, their presence a constant mocking reminder of his failure. He spent his days staring out the window, muttering threats and curses at them, neglecting his work and barely eating. Sleep, when it came, was filled with disturbing visions. In his dreams, the crows underwent a terrifying metamorphosis. Their feathers melted away, revealing leathery, bat-like wings. Their bodies elongated, becoming faceless, slender forms with long, sinuous tails ending in wicked talons. Josef's paranoid mind raced with dark possibilities. Were these monstrosities harbingers of death? Perhaps they were manifestations of restless spirits drawn to the neglected mausoleum. The thought that he might have inadvertently summoned these abominations through his carelessness tormented him. Josef's isolation deepened, to the point that even the neighbors who had checked and cared for him after the funeral stopped coming by, put off by his increasingly erratic behavior. One day, 3 days before All Saints' Day, Josef, determined to reclaim his sanity, decided upon a wild, unthinkable course of action. He would stand guard over the mausoleum of his beloved Helena, a sentinel against the dark. He made a promise to himself, his family buried underground, and to Helena, that he would do whatever it took to get rid of the crows that tormented him. But now, as he stood in his attic surrounded by memories and forgotten belongings, he couldn't help but feel conflicted. Was this really the solution? Was this what grief had reduced him to? His hands finally rested on the old tailcoat that his father had worn at his own wedding, now moth-eaten and faded. With bated breath and trembling hands, he donned the coat, fastening every button despite its evident disrepair. It felt right. It felt absurdly appropriate. A wry smile played on his lips, a humor laced with madness. Next came the second part of his master plan. Using scraps of black fabric found from his wife's old sewing kit, Josef painstakingly sewed himself a mask to cover his head. An old pair of gloves completed his peculiar ensemble. He looked in the mirror one final time before setting out. The transformation was eerie, both grotesque and fascinating. The sight that greeted him was more than he could bear. A ghoul-like figure stared back at him from the glass. But it wasn't just the mask and the clothes that made him unrecognizable. It was the glint in his eyes, a spark of manic determination replacing the emptiness that had resided there for so long. Tonight, Josef wouldn't be driven away. Tonight, he would face the crows head-on. Under the dark cloak of night, he made his way to the mausoleum. It felt like an eternity before he reached the structure. He stood still, waiting for some sign of recognition from his winged adversaries. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. Some crows scattered at the sight of the weird figure approaching, but his momentary triumph quickly faded as the crows returned, their caws now sounding like mocking laughter. For 3 days and nights, Josef remained at his post. He neither ate nor slept, his body sustained only by his manic determination. He talked to the crows, pleading with them to leave. The townspeople whispered about the madman in the cemetery. Look at him, standing there like some demented scarecrow. Someone should do something. They watched with morbid curiosity as Josef's humanity drained away. On the evening before All Saints' Day, a group of children dared each other to approach him. They found him standing motionless by the mausoleum, arms outstretched. When they tried to speak to him, he muttered incomprehensible phrases about dark wings and ancient gods. They're watching, always watching. As dawn broke on All Saints' Day, the town's physician approached the mausoleum, flanked by 2 burly orderlies. Josef stood motionless, his makeshift scarecrow outfit now tattered and filthy. "Josef, it's time to come with us. You need help," the doctor called softly. Josef's head snapped towards them, his eyes wild beneath his mask. "No!" he shrieked. "I can't leave them. The crows! They'll take everything!" As the orderlies moved to restrain him, Josef fought with the strength that can only be born out of madness. He clawed and bit, screaming about dark wings and watchful eyes. It took all 3 men to subdue him, his anguished cries echoing across the cemetery as they dragged him away from his vigil. And while a flock of white doves flew away from the nearest trees, scared by the commotion, the crow stayed still, silently gazing from the top of the mausoleum at Josef's descent into madness. At the asylum, Josef was confined to a small, padded cell. He spent his days drawing strange symbols on the wall with whatever he could find, even his own blood, when nothing else was available. He spoke in tongues, reciting incantations to ward off the crows he believed still haunted him. The doctors, baffled by his condition, could do little but watch as he descended further into lost, what little was left of his sanity. One morning, the orderlies found Josef's cell eerily silent. He lay motionless on the floor, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, a final, peaceful expression on his gaunt face. On the walls of his cell, one word stood out, written larger than the rest. Yibstul. The asylum staff was unsettled by the discovery. No one recognized the word, yet they all felt an inexplicable chill upon reading it. In the days that followed, several reported unsettling dreams of dark wings and faceless figures. The coroner's report listed Josef's cause of death as heart failure, likely due to malnutrition and exposure. But those who had seen his body whispered of other, stranger marks, patterns on his skin that resembled feathers, as if something had tried to claw its way out from within. As news of Josef's death spread, an unseasonable murder of crows descended upon the town, their cries seeming to carry the echo of a man's tormented screams. Due to his status as an asylum patient and the mysterious circumstances of his death, Josef was denied burial in the family mausoleum. Instead, he was interred in a simple grave on the outskirts of the cemetery, far from the resting place of his kin. The crows, however, did not abandon the mausoleum. They remained, a dark reminder of Josef's tragic fall. Some say that on certain nights, when the moon is high and the wind whispers through the trees, you can hear Josef's cries carried on the breeze, mingling with the cawing of the crows. And those who are brave enough to venture near the cemetery after dark swear they see a shadowy figure standing by the mausoleum, arms outstretched, guarding the graves of the Novak family.
And so, dear listeners, the Tattered Book closes on this tale of a man consumed by grief and madness. But remember, the line between sanity and lunacy is often as thin as a crow's feather. Who knows what truths lie hidden in the ravings of those we deem mad? If you dare to delve deeper into these eldritch mysteries, subscribe to our podcast, leave a rating and review, and whisper of our tales to others. Your engagement feeds the book, fueling the terrors yet to come. Until next time, and may your nights be sleepless and your dreams unsettling.